and welcome to the BYU Library Family History webinar. We're so glad you could join us today. I'm Rachel Bettis, and I'll be your host for this webinar. If you have any technical difficulties during the webinar, please use the chat box and I can address your concerns. You're also welcome to use the chat box during the webinar for comments, insights, and questions. However, all questions will be addressed at the end of the presentation. Our next webinar is on June 27th, and it will be with Dr. Roger Miner on your first confrontation with an old document in Germany. If you'd like to access a previous webinar, please visit our webinar index on our website or search on our YouTube channel. All of our webinars are recorded and uploaded by the following Monday for your convenience. We also post links to recordings and other updates on our Facebook and Twitter accounts. For today's webinar, we're pleased to hear from Maureen Brady on the Québecois French-Canadian research. Before we begin, here's a little bit about Maureen. Maureen Brady, a former school librarian and computer educator, has 40 years of experience with family history research. She's traced her Scottish roots back to the end of the 17th century and beyond, and has also pursued Chicago and the Midwest, the Trans-Allegheny, US, Quebec, Irish, and Swedish research. Maureen has made numerous presentations to genealogical societies, libraries, conferences, and workshops throughout the US, as well as presenting for Brigham Young University Library Family History webinar series. She's a member of the Genealogical Speakers Guild, as well as a life member of the Aberdeen and Northeast Scotland Family History Society and the Ohio, Chicago, and McHenry County, Illinois Genealogical Societies. She's also active in the Kentucky, Middle Tennessee, and Lake County, Illinois Genealogical Societies, the British Interest Group of Wisconsin and Illinois, and the Chicago Scouts Genealogical Group. We'll now turn the time over to Maureen.
Okay, so we're going to talk about the Québecois today. And the French-Canadian research in some ways is one of the better ones to do because it goes back so far with some very excellent records. The problem, of course, being the French. You have to understand or at least be able to read French or recognize the key words in a translation. But before we get into that, I always like to start with a bit of a historical overview, and I think especially that is true when we're talking about today's Quebec in English, Quebec in French, because the records are very much tied and key to various historical events that occurred within that part of North America. So we're going to talk about it in two areas, one before 1763 and the other after 1763 up to the Confederation of Canada. Now, why before 1763? Well, those of you who can remember this from your American history classes, it is the date of the end of the French and Indian War, what we called the French and Indian War, what Europe called the 7 Years' War, and it was ended by a Treaty of Paris. There have been many Treaty of Parises, but this was one of them, which then established an area in Canada that was French, it was no longer French, but now all British, and then established the colonies in what became the United States as two separate places based upon mostly the English language versus the French language. So the Treaty of Paris, dated 10 February 1763, it gave all of the colonies in North America, Acadia, which is the area of New Brunswick, Newfoundland, and Nova Scotia, and New France, today's Quebec, and they became British possessions called Nova Scotia and Quebec. So in 1763, up to that date, it was called New France. After that date, it is called Quebec. And the rest of the area that was once part of the French influence is now Nova Scotia. So looking further back before that, 1534, Jacques Cartier claimed the St. Lawrence region for France. The St. Lawrence River Valley begins in Lake Ontario and drains northeast toward Newfoundland and empties into the Atlantic Ocean. But when he claimed the St. Lawrence region, he was claiming all of the water that drained through the St. Lawrence to the Atlantic. So that meant all of the Great Lakes and all of the major rivers that empty into the Great Lakes, such as the Fox in Wisconsin, the Chicago River, which did not at that time, but does now, and several good-sized rivers in Michigan and Ohio and so forth. So by claiming the St. Lawrence region, essentially he claimed everything that flowed down through the Great Lakes and out through the St. Lawrence River Valley. In about 1629, Lake Superior was discovered by Etienne Brulé. He became the first to move that far inland from the mouth of St. Lawrence and from Lake Ontario, and discovered this extremely large Great Lake called Lake Superior. It's one of the largest lakes in the world and is deep enough that some even would consider it an ocean. It has all of the aspects of behavior as an ocean. And then in 1634, Lake Michigan was discovered by Jean Nicolet, and then that was subsequently explored by Joliet and Father Marquette later on after 1634. And then when that happened, coming down Lake Michigan, and then fording to what became the Illinois River, and then on down that to the Mississippi, then we have the entire Mississippi watershed added to what is now, or was then, New France. So New France covered from the mouth of the St. Lawrence by Newfoundland all the way down the Great Lakes, then through the various rivers to the Mississippi River Valley, the waters that shed to the Mississippi, then it's down to New Orleans. And if you take a look at this, this is a map from 1755 that I found in Wisconsin Historical Society. And the red stars are the forts that were established before 1755. So we have one here at Sault Ste. Marie, Michigan and Ontario. This one is St. Joseph, Michigan. Then we have a couple down here along the Mississippi in Illinois. This is Prairie du Chien in Wisconsin. There are a couple here along the Illinois River. One is Peoria today. The other is Starved Rock, if you're familiar with Illinois. And this is Madeline Island. So all of these were outlying forts, or at least fur trading sites of the French before 1755, and you can see how far inland what was considered New France had any kind of influence. And even though we're talking about Quebec and the Québecois, we have to remember that especially before 1763, they had a large presence in all of what is today the upper Midwest, the Great Lakes states. And for many of us who have French Canadian ancestry, we will find ourselves dealing with the records in this area as well as further east. Here's another slightly later map of this was after 1755, but before 1763, before the Treaty of Paris. We've added all of these additional forts or trading posts. We now have Green Bay, and we've added a couple more here in the Indiana area and Sandusky, Ohio. So the French have a very strong influence here. And though there are people coming up from Tennessee and Kentucky, that area, and beginning to settle southern Illinois and southern Indiana along the Ohio River as early as 1763, because they're coming from the river valleys and working their way north, the records for these people this early is going to be in Montreal, primarily, in the French Catholic records, because it was traveling priests who came down and serviced all of these areas for baptisms and marriages and burials. So taking a quick look at those Upper Louisiana forts and trading posts that was called Upper Louisiana, but it was still part of New France. And you can see this is Illinois, this is Michigan, Fort Crèvecoeur is Illinois, here's another Illinois, and so on, just to give you a sense of how old the settlements of the French were in the upper Midwest of the United States. And down here I've made a note, Cahokia's Church of the Holy Family is the oldest continuing active Catholic parish in the United States, and its records go all the way back to 1696. Much of this area was served by priests traveling from Montreal, including all of today's Quebec. They didn't have established churches, or if they did, They were small little outposts and often were still serviced by priests traveling from Montreal, but they did begin their own registers. And so you have to take a look at the dates when you start looking for registers. Take a look at the date of inception, because it may be too late for the area, the time frame you need, even though it's the right area. The earlier baptisms and marriages and burials were all recorded in the various Montreal churches, particularly the cathedral there. So in 1763, at the time of that first Treaty of Paris, just before it, this is what a map of North America would have looked like. And all of the blue is considered New France. We certainly have Quebec here, but here we have that upper Midwest all the way down to the Mississippi, to the mouth of the Mississippi here. You notice it goes all the way up into some parts of the prairie provinces today, all the way around the Great Lakes, and even some watershed leading into Hudson's Bay. So it is a very, very large area that you may quickly find yourself getting into, even if you don't think of it as being you have French Canadian ancestry. You may actually find that you do, because of this huge area of influence that New France carried into the North American continent before the 1763 treaty. So that's a quick look at before 1763. Then once the British took over, 1774, they passed, that is Parliament in London, passed an act called the Quebec Act, which gave the area of Quebec, today's Quebec, legal recognition of the French language, law, religion, and custom in that area, which is why today Canada is a bilingual country. This law goes all the way back to 1774, when the rest of the country was still going to be speaking English, but the area that we now call Quebec were granted the legal rights to continue the language and law and religion and custom that they had been using by French language and so on. In 1791, what is today, what was the larger Quebec of the period. Now, this is after our American Revolution, and there were many, many people who moved up into Quebec after the Revolutionary War who were the loyalists, those who were loyal to the King of England, and they fled north and established themselves along what is today the Canadian and U.S. border, upstate New York, and then upstate Vermont, just across the border into both Ontario and Quebec. And in 1791, enough people had done that. There was enough settlement that they divided this into Lower Canada, east of the Ottawa River, and Upper Canada, southwest of the Ottawa River. Today we know Lower Canada as Quebec and Upper Canada as Ontario. But there was a lot of still French people living in that Upper Canada area. So you have to keep that in mind, that after 1791, you're not looking for the Lower Canada records, perhaps. You need to start looking at Upper Canada as well. Now, explain Lower and Upper a bit. We are talking about the St. Lawrence River. Where a river begins is called the upper part of the river. That is Lake Ontario. Where it empties into another body of water, in this case the Atlantic Ocean, that is lower part of the river. If you look at a map, it doesn't make any sense, a flat map, because Lower Canada is further north than Upper Canada, because the river flows northeast. And so you do need to keep that in mind. It takes a little while to get used to it. Lower Canada, think Atlantic. Upper Canada, think Ontario. Then in 1841, there was an act of union that established the province of Canada within the British Empire. And now there was a single combined legislature which changed the names to Canada East and Canada West, which makes more sense to our minds when you look at a map. So Quebec becomes Canada East, and Ontario becomes Canada West. Again, keep that in mind when you're looking for records post 1841, such as the census of 1851 or 61. If you are looking for those who lived in today's Quebec, they are actually in Canada East. And that is where the censuses are filed, under Canada East. If you are looking for those who perhaps were on the Ontario side, but were still French Canadian, they were living in Canada West, post 1841. Just enough to confuse you. And then finally, in 1867, is the Confederation of the Dominion of Canada, and that unites the three provinces of Nova Scotia, New Brunswick, and Canada, i.e. Canada East and Canada West. And so now we have Nova Scotia, New Brunswick, Ontario, and Quebec as the Confederation or the Dominion of Canada in 1867. That's a quick overview of the various geographical and governmental entities that controlled the laws, the records, the record keeping, and so on. So on July 1st, 1867, this is the area of Quebec. You see, here's the St. Lawrence flowing northeast. So as we go back in time, this is Lower Canada. This is Upper Canada. We have here's Ontario coming in here, but this is an area where there are still a lot of French Canadians living on this side of the river. And then we have Newfoundland in the maritime provinces. This is still controlled by Hudson's Bay Company and is part of the British Empire. But this is the province of Quebec on July of 1867. And I think most of us think of Quebec in this terms, but it only really exists from 1867 onward. So let's talk about a few what I call peculiarities or things you need to know before you start researching. First, place names. We get back into this Lower Canada and Upper Canada from 1791 to 1841. Quebec did not exist as a governmental entity during that period. So you have to identify, did they live in Lower Canada? Did they live in Upper Canada? Then from 41 to 67, you have the province of Canada, which was Canada East, matching Lower Canada, and Canada West, matching Upper Canada. Those make more sense, East and West, but this is 1791 to 41, this is 41 to 67, and then after 67, we have Quebec. Then when you're looking at French place names, very often in family trees and even in the indexes and records, you're going to see it as ST period if it's the masculine form, or STE period if it's the feminine form. But be aware that some databases use the full spelled out word saint in their search windows. So sometimes if you can't find it under ST or STE, try spelling it out completely and see if that helps you find what you're needing. This is particularly true in Family Search Catalog. It always spells out saint in completely, though if you do an ST, it usually will find saint. But here's an example of Saint Ignace, and here's an example of Saint Scholastique. Then given names are really tricky. Almost all girls, especially in the 17th and 18th century, had the first name of Marie, after the Virgin Mary, and then given a second and sometimes a third name. And it was that second name that they were always referred to informally and sometimes also formally in the records going forward. The only time you would see Marie is on their baptismal record. So Cecile and Helene and Alphonsine were all originally Marie with their first name. Sometimes you'll see it complete and sometimes you won't. And especially in census records, you're only going to find this middle name. And if you go looking for an Alphonsine and you can't find her, try adding Marie in front of the name. And often that is the clue you need to be able to find them in the index. For the males, very often they were Jean Baptiste and then a given third name. So Pierre, Alexander, or Joseph. but they were all named after John the Baptist for whatever reason. That was the French custom. So if you're looking for a Pierre and can't find a Pierre of an appropriate age or place or whatever, try adding the Jean Baptiste in front of it. And be sure you spell it the French way with the E on the end and Jean for John Baptist Pierre here. Then we have Diet names, or D names sometimes. I always like to add the T so you know how it's spelled, but in French it would actually be D. So they have, here's one person that I've researched. Her name in a lot of the records is Marie Bricot. And when I went looking for Marie Bricot, I found records that could have been her, but I wasn't certain. And that is because she was sometimes written as M. Louise Bricot and M. Louise Lamarche. M from Marie, and Louise is that second name. Later on the census, somehow it became Marie, and maybe she didn't like the name Louise, but it was dropped. But when I keep going further back, looking for her baptismal and marriage records, I come up with Marie Bricot Diet Lamarche. There's an E on this because it's feminine. The D-I-T is masculine. Or M. Louise Bricot Diet Lamarche, Marie Louise Bricot Diet Lamarche. This is very, very common in the French Canadian records, this use of the D-I-T or D-I-T-E form of the name. It can represent where the father came from, where the grandfather came from. It could represent the parish that they were baptized in and then they moved on. You never know exactly what form you're going to find. I've even seen Marie Lamarche Diet Bricot. So when you start finding these possible matches, you really have to dig and pay attention to the details. Does this seem to be the same woman? And does everything seem to match? And this is especially when you're going to have to be sure you find the baptismal record, the marriage record, and the burial record, because often that's the only way you can put all these forms together and say, yes, this is the same woman or man, because this also is true for males. So her full name then is Marie-Louise, and commonly in the French records, they are hyphenated for the two given names, Bricot Diet Lamarche. That's her baptismal record that I finally was able to get back to. To give you some samples what the records look like, this is the baptism of a Jean-Baptiste Duprat in Saint-Benoît, Quebec. It's just north of Montreal. One of the common things about the registers of Quebec is that they put all of the sacramental events in one register, that is births, baptisms, marriages, and burials are all in the same book. The S over here, it's a little hard to read, but there is an S, and that stands for sepulcher. You can see somewhere in here it does say sepulcher, but sepulcher is the name for burial. So you're going to see an S in the margin and then the name of the deceased, usually. If you see a B, that represents a baptism. So here we have a baptism of a Jean-Baptiste Duprat. You'll see that in here in a minute. And then an M for mariage, for marriage. So you're looking for the B's and the M's and the S's. They are all chronologically listed in the same register. So you just keep looking. If you're looking only for baptism, just keep scanning for the B's. So in French, but we have the month of August, AOUT up here. I can read that. Here's my century, 1807, and so forth. I'm the undersigned priest. I'm not going to read every word, but we can see here Jean-Baptiste, born yesterday, that's H-I-E-R, of legitimate marriage of Jacques Duprat, laborer, and of Ursule Etier. And she has died. So she apparently died at his birth because it's Dépunk. It means dead mother of this parish, which is where they were living. And then it names the godparents down here, the witnesses. This is very interesting, even in a baptismal record, that they will indicate if the mother lived long enough for the baptism. So what you would need to do then is go into the same book, go backwards or forwards, and look for an S for an Ursule Etier to see when she actually died and what date she was buried. A marriage record is much longer because it gives details about both the bride and groom. But you see, here's M5, the 5th marriage of the year. It clearly tells me who the couple is. And then as you go through this, we get all the details. We have a detail that Jean-Baptiste is the son of Jacques Duprat in his majority, meaning he's over 21. We find out down here that Catherine Desjardins is of a daughter in her majority, which I think is 16 for girls. And it tells that her mother is also defunct. Her mother is deceased, and so on. Very clear writing most of the time. And if you know French or have a good French dictionary, not hard to translate. And then here finally, there's the blow up of it so you can see what I was talking about. Here's a confirmation that Jean-Baptiste's mother has died and that they were of this parish and so on and so forth. This is a burial record. You can see the S. This is the same Jean-Baptiste Duprat. Died in December of 1892. It tells me that he was the child of Jean-Baptiste Duprat and Catherine Desjardins. And then it gives me his date of death. This is the burial date as well. And then here are the witnesses to the burial. Sometimes if you look closely through the book, you'll see the same witnesses for all of the burials in that parish in that year. But sometimes you can also see that there's a possible family link, as it is here with Essier Duprat. That is an uncle. So that's just an example of what they look like. They're not that hard to read if you take the time and you've got a good French dictionary or have learned enough French. So let's take a look at the online resources, and we're going to start with Family Search. Not only is it free, but it's one of the best sites to do French Canadian research. Where I would suggest you start is the Research Wiki. And in your handout, I gave you the home page for Family Search with this little tree, this little box for search, so you can see what the options are. And we're looking this time at Research Wiki. When you choose Research Wiki, this is the page you get. It's also in your handout so that you can make notes if you wish. And up here, you just type the word Quebec. That's all you need to do. And it gives you a drop-down box, and you can see all the variant subject matter records. These are all articles in the wiki regarding Quebec in some fashion. But you want to do the one up here at the top, Quebec Canada Genealogy, as your first stop. So this is what this looks like. We have over here some ways to get started. If you're just starting out, it gives you some hints and helps there. If you want to, though, the thing you should look at, maybe do this first, but then come over here and look at this blue button. And as an aside, this blue button is on every province of Canada, every state in the United States, every country of the world, every county of England, Scotland, and Wales, all of the provinces of the Scandinavian countries, and the duchies and principalities of Germany. So you've got quite a lot of various articles to go through, but all of them have this blue button. And when you do the blue button, now I apologize, I thought I gave you this in the handout, and somehow or another I gave you a double of another one. When you press that blue button, click on it, you get a list divided by type of records. So we've got births here, marriages here, guardianships, and so forth. These are all databases that are on Family Search, Ancestry, MyHeritage, Find My Past, Genealogy Quebec. You can see that one represented down here. In fold 3, if it's military records, and all of the industry friends, as we call them. We used to call them partner sites, but now they're called industry friends. All of the other websites that are cooperating together as a group to not only digitize records, but index the records. And so Family Search has put all of those databases together in one list just by clicking that blue button. And if you see a $, that means there would be some cost involved in using that database. If there is no $, then these are going to be free because these are all family search. However, for Ancestry, MyHeritage, Fold3, and several others, they can be all accessed for free at all of the family search centers and at many public libraries that are affiliated with Family Search, especially Ancestry is true now. I cannot think of a library that doesn't have it. But some of the others are also at the affiliated public libraries, but certainly they are all available at Family Search. So even though it says it costs money, you can get free access if you go to a Family Search Center. So this is a very long list. It goes on for quite a long time. You just keep scrolling down. What I suggest you would do is print this page so you have a hard copy. And then as you look at particular databases, you can make note as to whether you found something useful or not, or someplace you want to go back to and check for another surname. You can make your notes on it and so forth. And at least for me, that makes it much easier for me to keep my research in somewhat of an organized fashion. Here's some more of it. We see biographies here. There are cemetery records. We have burying graves and find a grave included, but there's also a Genealogy Quebec has obituaries. The censuses are listed, the probate records. In Canada, in Quebec, the probate records are considered to be notarial records. Unfortunately, in Family Search, they are organized by the name of the notary, not by the name of the subject of the record. So you have to know who the notary is, or at least who the notary is in the town they lived, to be able to search them. They are not indexed. And so while it's a great record, it's not the best access. Ancestry has a much better index going all the way back to 1637. And so I would start here for the notarial records. And notarial records are very important for marriage contracts, not the marriage record in the church, but the actual contract that would have outlined the dowry and so forth. They would be in the notarial records. And then if we go back to the first page, where the Quebec Canada genealogy page, be sure you pay attention over here. I will talk about two of these, Genealogy Quebec and PRDH database, but we've also got a French genealogical word list. I'll show you part of that in a few minutes. There's a Latin word list if you need help with Latin, though most of the Quebec records are in French. And there's a few other databases or helps here that you might be able to use. If I take a look at the word list, all I have to do is click on it, and I think I went one too far. I did. And you get an outline here. So we've got an introduction. We have the characteristics of the language. It has some additional French language resources. It's not included here at the top, but you can go to that. And then there's a list of key words in French and in English, words such as marriage, death, burial, baptism, birth, husband, wife, child, infant, some occupations, and so on. Then there's the general word list, A to Z. It's a little mini dictionary. This is a PDF document. And again, I have printed this off. I keep it on my desk in a 3-ring binder. So when I'm working in my French Canadian records, I can just pull that out. And I have a real good reference point for most of the words I'm trying to translate, without having a large French dictionary on my desk. If I come down to the key words, then you can see here, English is bands. So this is what it looks like in French. That looks pretty obvious. So does baptism. That's not very different. Birth, we may not know the word naissance, but most of us would be familiar with ne in the two masculine and feminine forms. Here's all the words for burial. Here's the words for husband, and so on. This is one page. It's part of that dictionary. And again, I think it's a very useful thing to print off and have on your desk. There's additional Wiki Quebec articles on all of these topics. You would certainly want to go through and read them. perhaps not First Nations, unless you suspect there is some French-Canadian mixture with the Indians of North America there. But I would for sure want you to read the notarial records. There's also a reference to the newspapers that are published in Quebec, and there's links to those newspapers for their obituaries and so on. Then the other place to go is Browse Places. Now, on the home page, you're now going to go up to Records, and when you choose Records, you get this page. It's in your handout. And where you want to look is this section down here, Search by Place. You want to click on the blue Browse Places, and then you're going to, well, first, I'm sorry, you're going to put in the word Quebec, and then Browse Places. And when you do that, it takes you to this screen. It's a little bit of a one-stop shop, but it's only at the level of Quebec records. You cannot look for individual, excuse me a minute. You cannot look for individual parishes in this area. It's only for the province, but you can find provincial level records. So right now, there are no indexing projects for Quebec if you wanted to help over there. If they were, they would be listed. You can search. There are only 4 databases on Family Search. This is just Family Search for Quebec. Here are the 4 of them. And you can click on any one of them and work on just the one, or you can come up here and then it would search all 4 at once. Now you notice this one only has 6,100 names in it because it's part of a society of genealogical societies, family origins. So it's a family-oriented list that they're putting together. You can see the census has a little over 1 million, and we have parish registers. Now, when you take a look at the length of time, 1662 to 1898, and there are only 54,000 records. The Catholic registers are a little bit better at 79,000. They are not anywhere complete in terms of the index. There are indexes on other sites, however, that I will show you in a few minutes. If you continue to scroll down here, you come to a section, no trees are found, so I'm not going to discuss genealogies for this topic, but you're going to get image-only historical records, and it's chosen birth, marriage, and death. There are 2 image only, meaning there is no index, but the microfilms have been digitized, and you can browse through those microfilms as digital images on your computer at home. This one of the civil copy of church records is 1.3 million. The non-Catholic parish registers, that would represent those who lived in Quebec who were not Catholic. Perhaps they were Episcopalian, or they may even have been Methodist or some other religion. So that includes 278,000 images there. Now note, these are images. These are not individuals. So on a given image, you are likely to find at least 5 to 10 names. If I continue scrolling, I now come to the catalog. Remember, this is only for the province of Quebec, and there are 5,962 items in the catalog for Family Search representing Quebec. And the first are here. You notice they're somewhat alphabetical by number to start with, but you can click here and see all 5,900 in one very long list. And you can see the variety. We have marriages in Saint Maurice, and 150 years of them. Apparently that's when these are the burials, those are the marriages. Here's a Presbyterian cemetery in Windsor, Quebec. There's a Windsor, Quebec, and there's a Windsor, Ontario. So this would be that one section under Browse Place, but I will repeat, only at the provincial level. If you need to find or want to find what's available for a given parish, you find a record and it says they are born in Saint Scholastique. Where you need to go is to the catalog. So you go to the catalog, again under search, choose catalog, and when that screen comes up, you're going to type in up here the name of the parish. Be careful with your spelling, and be careful with the STE and ST periods and so on. But if for Saint Scholastique, if I entered that, then I would get a list here that there are 6 cemetery items in the car catalog. There are 37 church records of one type or another, 19 civil registrations, and 1 history, all for Saint Scholastique of Douze-Montants in Quebec, north of Montreal. So for one parish, there is quite a bit of information, and it easily takes you back into the mid-1600s, especially these church records. So here's an example from the parish register for Saint Scholastique. We see there's an index that doesn't begin until 1825. This is the register of 1825 to 1835, and so on. And you notice that I have black cameras without keys. This was taken at my house. So all of these records are digitized and available at home, but not well indexed. But you can go through them. There are indexes at the beginning of most books. So you could, if you're looking for whatever surname, you could do it that way. But the records themselves are there. They have been digitized. You can save them. You can print them. They're an excellent resource once you've identified the parish and you've gone to the catalog to find it. So moving on to Ancestry. Ancestry has a lot of Quebec records as well, but the best way to find them is to come up here to the search function, do the search, and then you want to go to all collections. And when you do that, it changes screen so that it shows you the way for you to search. But again, scroll down, and there's a map at the bottom, defaults to the United States, but choose North America. And when you do that, then you can choose Canada. And then it pops up with the Canadian list here. And we have the census voter list first, and the birth, marriage, death. These are all on just Ancestry. Over here, we can select a province. So you would come over here to select Quebec. And when you do that, then here's the Quebec list on Ancestry. We notice we have an 1825 census of Lower Canada. This goes back to that lower end of the St. Lawrence, and an 1842 census of Canada East. Both of those that still exist. There are not a lot of names on them, but that probably represents most of who lives in that area at that time. As we come down into the birth, marriage, and death, one of the ones I wanted to point out is this section, this very first one, the Quebec Vital and Church Records, 1621 to 1968. It is in French, but it's not difficult to work with. It's called the Drouin Collection. It was an effort by the Drouin Institute in Montreal to try to index all of the Catholic Church records of Quebec into one master database. You notice the numbers here, 34 million plus. And it's certainly a good place to go to get the index information. And then if the image doesn't come up well on Ancestry, you've got the information, you can go back to the parish record on Family Search and pull it up there. So there's kind of a back and forth going on there. Another one that is the old standard for French Canadian research is this one right here, the Genealogical Dictionary of Canadian Families in English, but it is actually written in French, 1608 to 1890. It was written by Bishop Tankay. It was his original idea. You notice there's only 355,000 in this compared to 34 million plus in this one, even though it goes all the way to 1890. It is extremely good for the 17th and 18th century and gets spotty when you get into the 19th century. So if you're working from the 19th century, I would not choose this option first. But once you get back before 1800, then I would start looking in this index. There are some errors, but it is certainly a good first place to start. And this is what it looks like when you find someone. So this is 1678. Jean Robert Duprat. This is silent and ending T's are silent. He was a royal notary. So this is a notary in the family, which now gives me a name to go do browsing in those notarial records because I can now look for him. He was born in 1647, and S is Barry on the 30th of August, 1726 in Beauport. He married Marguerite Vachon. She was born 1658, died on the 24th of June, 1703, and there's a reference to 9 in both of these cases. It's a footnote at the bottom. Marguerite's father is Paul. And then when they have their children, when they were born, if they were married, when they died, who they married, and where it happened, and so forth. So we have a little family group here, which then you can carry on to keep going. So we've got the names, we've got the birth dates, and then you can go to, for instance, go look for the Jean Baptiste, born in 1689, and then it will take you from there. So this is a good first place to start if you are back in the before 1800. There are errors, but that is not enough to make you not use it, because what he tried to do was to put the family group together. So it gives you a good picture of the family group as a whole, and then gives you all of these clues to start looking for the original records. The other two websites that I wanted to talk about very quickly is this one, for want of just making it short. We usually just call it PRDH. You can see the name here in French where it comes from. And this is a pay site that has tried to carry both the Giron index and the Tanquet index up into the 20th century. They have baptisms, marriages, and burials on here, and you can be sure you choose English, unless you really want to try working the site in French. And here's some of you can also get to it through the Quebec Canada genealogy page I showed you. Here's another link to it right here. It has indexes, which you can use for free most of the time. And then, but to get to the images, you do have to join. And this is an example. This is what the free index search looks like. I left this very general, just looking for Sophie Fortier. And when you can see all of the options here. These are all of the locations, the parishes where a marriage took place. These are all M marriages, and here's the dates. And here's an ID number, and I'm not sure what that means. You notice there's a variant on Forcier here. Her age is in the minority, under 16, majority, over 16. So we have some options here, but if you didn't know precisely where she was from, it would be very difficult, even by age, because we have a 34, a 40, 41, 43, 2 and 43. It may be very difficult to differentiate one Sophie Fortier from another for you to go and do a work on trying to find that record. But just to show you what the cost is, it's by hit, the number of hits that you get. And it's $20, this is US dollars, $20 a month for 100, which averages out to 20 cents a hit. You can go all the way up to $255 annual for 3,000, well, not annual, but for 3,000. This is not for the year, it's for 3,000 hits. If you have a deep family history in French Canada, in Quebec, you will quickly go through the 3,000. So I would use it as if the second or third option, actually the third after you've done both family search and ancestry. And then if you still have trouble finding or you need to come more recent, then come to PRDH. The second one I want you to see is Genealogy Quebec, the genealogy of Quebec in English. They have a lot of material here. Again, this is a pay site, but the two biggest and the most likely ones you're going to use, it's called La France, but it's the baptisms, marriages, and deaths. And it not only includes Quebec, but it also includes Ontario, Acadia, and the United States. And remember that the Acadians moved to Louisiana. So if you have Louisiana people, this would also help you as you go backwards from that. And you can see the various time frames, and we have from 1919 all the way up to today. I'm not sure what they're defining today is. This is a very new site. It's only been up for a couple of years. but it has a lot of material in it in addition to the regular indexes and records that we think of, like the Protestant records are here. We have every death that the government recorded between 1926 and 1997. So there's various reasons to use this, but again, I would use it third after Family Search and Ancestry, and maybe even after PRDH. The obituary section, this is the only one I have found with obituaries beginning in 1860, and they have almost 1.3 million obituaries from the newspapers. They also have 2.7 million that have been published online. And there are 740,000 headstones that have been recorded for Quebec and Ontario. This also would be another good reason to do this site and to pay some money to get into these particular sections. The cost is you can do 1 day for $7, and you notice it's only 75 images for 24 hours, or there is a monthly or yearly subscription for all of those. And so, bon chance with your research. And now I'm going to stop share so we can look in the chat and see if there's any questions.
Thank you all so much for joining us today. We are so glad that you could be here, and we hope that you'll join us for our next webinar, which will be next week on June 27th with Dr. Roger Meinert on your first confrontation with an old document in Germany. A recording of this webinar will be made available next week, and you can view that on our YouTube channel or on our website. If you have any comments or questions, you can always email us at fh_webinars@byu.edu or follow our Facebook and Twitter. Thank you all and have a wonderful
Rachel,
Yeah.
there was a comment from Midge about she has Irish and German in Quebec. Still look in the French records. When I have been working through the French records, I very often find an entry for someone who is Scottish, English, French, or German, or Irish. They actually, often that was the only clergyman that could do the baptisms and marriages for them, and so they do occur in the Catholic registers in Quebec.
Perfect. All right. Thank you, everyone, and have a wonderful week.